my value is for the children. So that's what I wanted to add to the circle work. I'm here to speak with you about the Code of Conduct Advisory Council. My name is Susan Maze-Rothstein. I teach at Northeastern University School of Law, and I am responsible for the Legal Skills and Social Context Social Justice Program, which is how I came to this work. In 2010, the Boston School Committee created the Code of Conduct Advisory Council, COCAC, to be a community-based, all of the stakeholders within the educational community for Boston participating in advising the school committee about what's going on with their code of conduct. So I was asked and joined in 2010 when the Code of Conduct Advisory Council was created, and have been on that committee since. I sit as the chair, co-chairing this, what's known as the Systems, Policies, and Procedures Committee. That committee has been responsible for working on the Boston Public Schools Code of Conduct for the past several years. During the past 2 years, we have worked closely. So what I like about COCAC, as we call it, is that it is an advisory council. So if you're an advocacy group, you stand outside of a building and you yell at it, "Stop doing that!" If you're an advisory council, you go in and you meet with the people in the building and you say up close and personal, "Stop doing that!" So, so that's sort of been the distinction. We've met monthly with the CEO who's responsible for discipline, Sam McKenna, in the Boston Public Schools, and we've met with their administrative team who were charged with working on the Code of Conduct itself. We actually, during the 2-year period that we worked on the code, we would give track changes in the code draft document based on our research and our suggestions, and I'm happy to report that virtually every recommendation we made was incorporated into the Boston Public Schools Code of Conduct. So that's all the good news. And Boston was interested in being ahead of Chapter 222, and so made their changes 1 year in advance, and had a year of starting, and I repeat, starting, to get those changes actually implemented. That, of course, brings us to the resource this problem, which is implementing the code, the new code, which now happens to be actually a leader in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts vis-a-vis compliance with Chapter 222. We had about 20 lawyers working on this, so I can say this with authority. Compliance with Chapter 222 and with the new regulations that DESE has put out. So Boston now has a code that is arguably fully compliant with the law. The challenge, of course, is getting that to work all the way to the ground. And so, so we've done a couple of things. First, we identified a federal grant and secured $180,000, which will be used up by this May, to bring one of the 2 recommended approaches to train Boston Public Schools personnel, and that's in the area of restorative justice practices. That work was done by Boston Public Schools in partnership with Suffolk University Restorative Justice Institute that is headed up by Carolyn Boyce-Watson. Carolyn Boyce-Watson has successfully, in the past 12 months, taught about 250 Boston Public Schools personnel, and they've been rather positive and enthusiastic about
in this room,
yeah,
often
get a lot of it here, getting more of that work done. However, that really, Carolyn understands this, I know this, it's more like a drop in the bucket. There's a lot more in order for people to feel comfortable and start really using these practices from a whole school approach is going to take some time and some more support. Carolyn is trying to create she has the notion of creating a training certificate program, which she would have school institutions partner and get a reduced rate to some personnel for continuing education sorts of credit to get the certificate training to do restorative justice practices. That would help to implement restorative justice practices rather than just looking for soft money to get more training done. So, so the code itself suggests restorative justice practices. The premise is, which is law-based now, exclusion must be a last resort. So in response to the figures that were just the horrific, I would have to say, figures of education deprivation to largely poor children of color, the response by state law is that exclusion must be a last resort, and every school must now, by law, elect alternatives to exclusion prior to moving in the direction of exclusion. So, so then, Boston, so that's what we did. That took about 3 years. And so then we're like, okay, more on implementation. So our newest idea is to work with the family outreach? Family Engagement Office with Michelle Brooks and her folks. And we looked at the law some more because we're lawyers and that's what we do. And what we noticed was that, in fact, school site councils are required in every single school in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. School site councils in Boston, the good news is, thanks to the efforts of the Boston Teachers Union many years ago, have decision-making power, unlike all the other school site councils in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So what we just thought I'd let you know.
Because people fought for that
yeah,
in the 60s.
that's actually big stuff right there. That's big stuff. So what we thought we would try to do, because Boston is busily trying to deal with another $54 million cut in budget, we thought probably it would be best to try to launch a pilot of supporting certain schools that have school site councils that we would call fully functioning. That is, they are bipartite. They have the requisite ratio of parents and personnel. They have the required 2 students at least, and they have committee functions. We also looked for schools that had school governance, because unfortunately, though Boston has raised its school site councils from 40% a year ago to 99% today, many of those school site councils are coming sort of kicking and screaming, and they don't have a lot of student-directed school governance, which means they handpick students. That's not what we were looking for. We were looking for both robust school site councils and robust student involvement by student governments. What we're going to suggest is we're going to support pilots, and we're looking for up to 10 of them, which is a very complex effort indeed, because we had to look at what all of the schools had reported about their school site councils and so forth. And we've invited 10 schools to participate in a pilot. What we would do is we would create and ask them to create a subcommittee on school discipline. The subcommittee would be taught to review school discipline data, to do what the law requires, which is to review what is going on in that particular school, and also in comparison to other Boston public schools, and then to review what selections have been made for alternatives to exclusion, and to support the implementation of alternatives to exclusion in their school, and to report on how those alternatives to exclusion are going, and to make recommendations on an annual basis for changes to the student handbook and the school-based rules which are also required by the school site councils, to actually make changes that are responsive to the status of that school on school discipline issues. So we thought if we could create a pilot that actually worked. The challenge was that we also wanted schools that were doing terrible things to students of color. But once you have school site councils that are fully functioning and school governance with student involvement, lo and behold, suddenly the figures are already improving just by the fact of having these things there. So if we then charge those schools with doing this particular work, which is legally what they're required to do, then we're hoping that that will start to be something that we can track and document and then show to other schools and say, hey, you know, it's not that hard. You could make your school site council look like this, and you know, you could make a subcommittee that does this, and lo and behold, you could actually improve what's going on at your school level. So that's what COCAC has been involved in. We call that committee the Operations and Implementation Committee. So we have SPMP and O&I, and those are the only two committees that COCAC has. So that's the work that we're involved in, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, or turn the floor back over to the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights.
So you said the 10 schools have already been chosen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I sat at the table, as did Andrea, and with Michelle Brooks and her folks, and Tom Mila from the Mass Advocates for Children, and we did the hard work of trying to make those choices. And it's an uncomfortable process because, you know, you're looking for certain things and you really want to help the schools that need the most help. But at the moment, the schools that need the most help also don't have robust school site councils,
Which makes sense.
which is sad but true. And so to get something to work, we need a school site council that functions as opposed to one that doesn't function.
And are these for high schools or?
We're working at the high school level right now, but we would like to get a model that could be fungible across school levels. Yep.
So is your ideal would be like a far increased school autonomy, basically?
Absolutely. Education law works in a way, so there's all the federal law, there's state law, there's the district law, you know, and then there's these schools. And so really it all boils down to the schools being able to translate all that stuff into something that works in that school's culture. And for schools to change, each school culture has to be respected and has to be helped to improve what it is that it does. So, and encouraged. Minus the resources, because there's not a lot of money floating around.
Do you know which high schools?
But there's a lot of good people.
Yeah. Do you know which high schools have been chosen actually?
I do, and I should have brought the list,
Okay.
and I apologize. But you don't have.
We can, I have my computer, but I'm gonna send this out with the video, and then we can include some information like that.
Yeah, I have my card. If anybody is interested, I have all this stuff, all kinds of documents I can send you. If you're interested, happy to do it. Okay.
So, yeah, if anybody has questions, I guess send them to Brenda.
So with the schools that do have high functioning school site councils and
I would
student
say high functioning, fully functioning.
fully functioning school site
I
councils.
can't vouch for high yet.
Okay,
Minimally functional.
so that have those structures in place. Are there any, besides they happen to have better discipline data, were there any other trends that you noticed across those schools? Like maybe what kinds of schools they were?
So we were looking for larger schools.
Okay.
So I know that, for example, Brighton High is struggling with discipline numbers, although they have a school site council that's fully functioning and student governance in their school. And so they're one of the ones.
Okay.
I think East Boston we thought maybe one of the ones,
But then there was a problem, wasn't it?
what's that?
Wasn't there a problem with East Boston for
Yeah.
something?
I don't wanna speak too much out of turn because my memory is
Yeah.
really.
And wasn't there something about some of the pilot schools and the charter schools?
Yeah, so charter schools don't have school site councils, they have governance, what are they called? Governance councils.
Governance boards, I think.
Governing boards. That I don't think have to play by the same rules
Yeah.
as the school site councils.
And pilots, is that the same?
Yeah, we're in
at
Orchard
schools?
Gardens and we're a pilot and we don't, because I've asked since I've been there, we don't have a school site council, we just have a governing board.
Yes, same
Which
as my
seems
school.
to run differently.
Yeah.
I wonder
So-
if there's something in the takeover, I wonder if there's something in the takeover language or turnaround school language, if there's something about school site council not being as powerful.
Yeah. So, so what we would like to promote is more development of school site councils, more, we have a BSAC student, so our BSAC student was also at the meetings for planning this. Our BSAC student has been very emphatic that we want to have transparency, we want to have the student's voice. So for this particular subcommittee, while we're saying for a whole school site council, you're only required to have 2 students, we want at least 2 students on the subcommittee.
Right.
And we want those students' voices to be respected. And so, those are some, we're gonna do an orientation meeting, we're going to do, some support documents, we're going to, create a point person for check-in about how to get this thing off the ground. And so we're really trying to make a pilot that will be at least supported with the available resources. Ideally, we go to the schools and see them in action. We don't have that kind of firepower right now, but we'll do everything else that we can.
Oh, I wanted to throw out another great development, which was out of these trainings that happened at the BTU. I guess it was 250 people. I didn't realize it was that much, but there was a cohort of teachers that is, because we're not actually getting the leadership from the administration, which is really where it should be coming from, but who are organizing as teachers and staff, and there's a couple of network liaisons, but to begin to develop a process to try and engage more teachers and staff and to figure out how to move this forward system-wide. And we have 3 subcommittees. But one of our questions is who do we report to in terms of the administration, and who do we, and the problem is I think many people in the administration are supportive, but they're also very overwhelmed. And so that's something that has to be clarified. And I'd like to say that the next meeting for that is going to be April 8th, 4 to 6 at that new cafe in Jamaica Plain, and it's open to everybody.
Yeah. In fairness to the diminished leadership of the Boston Public Schools, the way the code of conduct was written is that we were not requiring schools to take, say, restorative justice practices as an approach, nor were we requiring schools to do what's known as PBIS or MTSS here in Massachusetts. We were offering those as 2 suggestions and suggesting that schools could create their own organic whatever they wanted as well. The last thing that schools want is something shoved down their throats. And so the part of why you don't get, quote, leadership on this issue is the nature of what we have put into the code is not one of requirement, it's one of you're required to choose something. Here's a couple of really good examples that are evidence-based, but you get to choose what you want to choose because you get to choose. We're really going to probably be working from the ground up as opposed from the top down because that's the nature of what we've constructed legally.
Can I ask a quick question, Susan? I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but it's a piece that I'm sort of trying to figure out from my own work, which is, even Boston has a lower overall average of just nonviolent, non-criminal, non-drug than the rest of the state. but it's still a pretty big percentage, 40 to 50% across the board. And I was actually looking at the code of conduct today, and I couldn't figure out, based on the code of conduct, what those category 18 offenses are, or if they're all sort of being hand-wavy, like the student has repeatedly violated something, and so now I have to suspend them.
Yeah, well, you're never gonna find like a list in the code of conduct. The goal is to push for alternatives to exclusion before there's any actual disciplinary action that will require due process protections.
Right.
So, there's no.
But Boston doesn't have, I guess I'm trying to figure out when these things get reported from schools to the city. I know cutting class is a code for something that